In the sprawling depths of Kepler Station, where 67 alien species coexisted in careful harmony, everyone knew the unwritten rule: never underestimate a human's capacity for violence when provoked. The Galactic Council had spent 3 decades trying to understand why this particular species could shift from peaceful cooperation to devastating retaliation in mere seconds. They were about to get a masterclass in human psychology, courtesy of a maintenance worker named Sarah Chen and a bucket of industrial coolant. What started as workplace harassment between species would spiral into an incident that changed interstellar law forever. Because when you corner a human, when you think their smaller stature and apparent fragility makes them easy prey, you forget one crucial detail. Humans didn't claw their way to the top of Earth's food chain by being gentle. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had a saying: play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her forehead as she crawled out of the ventilation shaft on level 7 of Kepler Station. The industrial coolant lines had been acting up again, and as the only human small enough to fit through the maintenance tunnels, she'd volunteered for the job. Her supervisor, a 6-armed hexapod named Crickstyle, appreciated her willingness to take on the difficult assignments that larger species couldn't handle. The station hummed around her with the constant activity of interstellar commerce. Kepler Station served as a neutral trading hub where dozens of species conducted business far from their homeworlds. Humans had only joined the Galactic Council 15 years ago, making them the newest and often least respected members of the Alliance. Most aliens viewed them as weak, fragile creatures who'd somehow lucked into space travel. Sarah had been working maintenance on Kepler for 3 years now, ever since graduating from the Terran Technical Institute. She'd grown used to the occasional condescending comment about human limitations, but lately things had gotten worse. A group of Krillian workers had taken to harassing the human staff, led by a particularly unpleasant individual named Vorthak. Krillians stood nearly 8 feet tall, with chitinous exoskeletons and mandibles that clicked when they spoke. Their homeworld was a harsh desert planet where only the strongest survived, and they brought that aggressive mentality with them wherever they went. Vorthak seemed to take particular pleasure in making humans uncomfortable, often blocking corridors or accidentally bumping into them with his considerable bulk. As Sarah gathered her tools, she heard the familiar clicking sound of Krillian speech echoing down the corridor. Her heart sank as Vorthak rounded the corner with 2 of his cronies, Zektar and Bilmoth. The 3 Krillians wore the blue jumpsuits of cargo handlers, but they spent more time causing trouble than doing actual work. "Look what we have here," Vorthak chittered in heavily accented standard. "The little human is playing in the dirt again." Sarah stood up slowly, her jaw tight. She'd learned that showing fear only made things worse with bullies, regardless of their species. "Just doing my job, Vorthak. Maybe you should try it sometime." The Krillian's mandibles spread wide in what passed for a grin among his people. Such brave words from such a tiny creature. "Do you know what we do to insects that buzz too loudly on Krillia Prime?" "I'm not an insect," Sarah replied calmly, though her hand moved instinctively toward the plasma cutter on her tool belt. "And this isn't your homeworld." Zektar chittered something in the Krillian language that made the others laugh. Sarah's translator implant caught fragments of it, something about humans being soft-shelled weaklings who needed machines to survive in space. "You know," Vorthak continued, stepping closer, "I've always wondered if humans really are as fragile as they look. Perhaps we should test it." Before Sarah could react, the Krillian grabbed a maintenance bucket filled with industrial coolant that had been sitting nearby. The liquid was used to regulate temperature in the station's systems and was perfectly harmless to most species, but it was also freezing cold and would ruin her work clothes. "Vorthak, don't," she warned. But the alien was already raising the bucket. "Let's see how the little human likes a cool drink," he chittered. The coolant hit Sarah like a wall of ice water, soaking through her jumpsuit and leaving her gasping from the shock. The Krillians erupted in clicking laughter as she stood there dripping, her dark hair plastered to her skull and her clothes clinging uncomfortably to her body. For a moment, Sarah just stood there, processing what had happened. The coolant wasn't dangerous, but it was humiliating, and she was now facing a long walk back to her quarters through crowded corridors while soaking wet. Worse, word of this incident would spread through the station's gossip networks within hours. But as she watched Vorthak's mandibles spread wider in amusement, something shifted in her expression. The shock faded from her eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating look that would have been familiar to any human who'd spent time in Earth's military academies. Sarah Chen had grown up in the New Singapore Arcology, where her parents ran a small electronics repair shop. She'd learned to fix things with her hands and solve problems with her mind. But she'd also learned something else in the crowded, sometimes dangerous streets of the megacity: how to fight. Her martial arts training had started at age 7 with traditional kung fu, but by her teens, she'd moved on to more practical systems. Krav Maga from the Israeli districts, boxing from the American sections, and Muay Thai from the Southeast Asian quarters. Her instructors had been refugees from Earth's various conflicts, people who understood that sometimes violence was the only language bullies understood. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a strange note that made Shiktar's chittering laughter falter. Vorthak's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Thank you? For what, little insect?" "For making this simple," Sarah replied, and then she moved. The first rule of fighting larger opponents was speed and precision. Sarah's right fist snapped out in a perfectly executed straight punch, targeting the soft tissue just beneath Vorthak's mandible cluster. The blow landed with surprising force for someone so much smaller, and the Krillian's head snapped back with a crack. But Sarah wasn't done. As Vorthak staggered, she pivoted on her left foot and drove her right knee up into his solar plexus, or at least the Krillian equivalent. Even through his chitinous exterior, the blow was enough to double him over. Gasping, the entire exchange had taken perhaps 3 seconds. Zektar and Bilmoth stood frozen in shock as their leader crashed to the deck plating like a felled tree, his 8-foot frame making a tremendous noise as it hit the metal floor. Sarah stood over the unconscious Krillian, coolant still dripping from her hair, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. She looked up at the other 2 aliens, who had backed away several steps. "Anyone else want to test how fragile humans are?" she asked conversationally. Bill Moth's translator implant struggled with a rapid stream of Krillian expletives as he and Zektar grabbed Vorthak's arms and began dragging their unconscious leader away. They disappeared around the corner, leaving Sarah alone in the corridor. For a moment, she just stood there, watching the puddle of coolant spread across the deck plating. Then she sighed and activated her comm unit. "Chen to maintenance control. I'm going to need a cleanup crew on level 7, section C, and someone might want to inform security that there's been an incident." Kriksdal's voice crackled through the speaker, his 6 arms probably already reaching for different control panels. "What kind of incident, Sarah? Are you injured?" Sarah looked down at herself, still soaked and cold but otherwise unharmed. "No, I'm fine. But I think I may have just started an interspecies diplomatic crisis. The implications of what she'd done were already beginning to sink in." Krillians were a warrior culture with strict codes about honor and retribution. Knocking out one of their people, especially in front of witnesses, was going to have consequences that went far beyond station security. But as she began gathering up her scattered tools, Sarah found that she didn't regret it. For too long, humans had been treated as second-class citizens in the galactic community, seen as weak and fragile by species that measured worth by physical strength. Maybe it was time to remind everyone that humans hadn't reached the stars by being pushovers. Her comm unit chirped again. This time it was Security Chief Mordak, a gruff Ursinian whose bear-like species was known for their straightforward approach to law enforcement. "Chen, report to security immediately. We've got 3 very upset Krylians down here claiming you assaulted them without provocation." "On my way," Sarah replied, clipping her tools back onto her belt. She'd known this was coming. The question now was whether station administration would see this as justified self-defense or as an unprovoked attack on a larger, theoretically more dangerous alien. As she made her way through the corridors toward the security section, Sarah noticed other aliens watching her with new interest. Word was already spreading, she realized. The small human who'd knocked out a Krylian warrior was becoming something of a sensation. A group of Zentorian dock workers, their crystalline bodies chiming softly as they moved, actually stepped aside to let her pass. A phaserid engineer, normally aloof and condescending toward mammalian species, nodded respectfully as she walked by. By the time Sarah reached the security office, she was beginning to understand that the repercussions of her actions would extend far beyond just her and Vorthak. In a community where reputation and perceived strength determined social standing, she'd just announced that humans were not to be trifled with. Security Chief Mordak was waiting for her behind his desk, his massive frame making the standard-issue chair creak ominously. His ursine features were set in what might have been disapproval or amusement. It was hard to tell with his species. "Sit down, Chen," he rumbled. "We need to talk." Sarah took the offered chair, acutely aware that she was still dripping coolant onto the floor. Through the transparent aluminum window of Mordak's office, she could see the 3 Krillians in the holding area. Vorthak was conscious again, but sporting what looked like a significant swelling around his mandible cluster. "So," Mordak continued, consulting a data pad, "according to the Krillians, you attacked them without warning or provocation. They claim they were simply having a friendly conversation when you became violent.
Is that what they told you? Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. That's their version.
What's yours? Sarah took a deep breath and began recounting the incident, from the harassment that had been building over weeks to the bucket of coolant to her response. Mordak listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, the Ursinian was quiet for a long moment. Then he touched a control on his desk, and a holographic display materialized above it. Station security cameras caught the whole thing, he said. Funny thing about Krillians, they assume smaller species don't fight back, so they get careless about surveillance. The recording played out exactly as Sarah had described it. Verthak's aggressive posturing, the deliberate dumping of the coolant, and her swift, precise response. The knockout punch was even more impressive in slow motion, showing the exact technique and power that had dropped the much larger alien. Textbook self-defense, Mordak concluded, shutting off the display. Though I have to ask, where did a maintenance worker learn to hit like that? Perth, Sarah replied simply. You learned to take care of yourself in the arcologies. Mordak's expression might have been a smile. I'll bet you do. Well, the good news is that you're not being charged with anything. The bad news is that you've just become the most famous human on this station, and not everyone is going to be happy about it. As if to emphasize his point, Sarah's comm unit began chirping with incoming messages. News of the incident was spreading through the station's communication networks, and everyone from her supervisor to complete strangers wanted to know what had happened. What about the Krillians? She asked. Warthak will be spending a few days in the medical bay getting his pride treated, along with his injuries. His friends are being released with a warning about harassment. But Chen? Mordak leaned forward, his expression serious. This isn't over. Christians don't forget slights to their honor, and you just humiliated one of their warriors in front of witnesses. They're going to want payback, Sarah nodded grimly. She'd expected as much. What do you recommend? Watch your back, stick to public areas when possible, and maybe consider learning more about Krylian culture. You're going to need to understand what you're dealing with. As Sarah left the security office, she felt the weight of dozens of alien gazers following her progress through the corridors. Some looked impressed, others worried, and a few seemed openly hostile. Word of her confrontation with Vorthak had clearly spread throughout the station, and everyone was wondering what it meant for the delicate balance of interspecies relations on Kepler. Back in her quarters, Sarah finally stripped out of her coolant-soaked jumpsuit and took a long, hot shower. As the warm water washed away the industrial fluid and the tension of the day, she found herself thinking about what Chief Mordak had said. The Krylians would want revenge, that was certain. But she'd made her choice when she decided to stand up to their bullying, and she wasn't about to back down now. Her comm unit was still chirping with messages when she emerged from the shower. Most were from curious colleagues or friends who'd heard about the incident, but one caught her attention immediately. It was from Captain Maria Santos, the senior human officer on the station, and Sarah's unofficial mentor. My office, 0800 hours tomorrow, the message read. We need to discuss your new status as a galactic celebrity. Sarah smiled grimly as she settled into bed. Tomorrow was going to bring a whole new set of challenges, but for the first time in months, she felt like she'd actually accomplished something meaningful. Vorthak and his cronies had learned that humans weren't the pushovers they'd assumed, and word of that lesson would spread throughout the alien community. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she'd just struck the first blow in a much larger conflict. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were really capable of when pushed too far, and she had a feeling that one unconscious Krillian was only the beginning. Captain Maria Santos was a legend among the human crew on Kepler Station. At 52, she'd served 20 years in the Terran Space Navy before joining the civilian sector, and her office walls were covered with commendations from conflicts most people preferred to forget. Her dark eyes missed nothing, and her reputation for straight talk had earned respect even among the more arrogant alien species. Sarah arrived at Captain Santos's office at exactly 0800 hours. Her freshly laundered jumpsuit crisp and her bearing military straight despite never having served in the armed forces. She'd learned early in her career that presenting yourself professionally was half the battle in gaining respect from other species. Sit down, Chen, Santos said without preamble, not looking up from the datapad in her hands. I've been reading the incident reports from yesterday, and I have to say, I'm impressed. That Krillian had 6 inches and probably 80 pounds on you, and you dropped him like a sack of Martian potatoes. Sarah took the offered chair, unsure whether she was about to be praised or reprimanded. It was self-defense, Captain. You'd been escalating the harassment for weeks. Oh, I know exactly what it was, Santos replied, finally looking up with a slight smile. I've reviewed the security footage 3 times, and I've had Chief Mordak walk me through the whole situation. You did everything by the book, right up until you introduced that Krillian's face to your fist. Santos stood and moved to the viewport that looked out over the station's central hub. Ships of dozens of different configurations moved through the docking bays like a complex ballet, their various crews conducting the business that kept galactic commerce flowing. The thing is, Chen, you've just accomplished something that took me 15 years of military service to manage. You've gotten the alien community to take humans seriously as a physical threat. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Ma'am? Santos turned back from the viewport, her expression serious. Word of your little demonstration has spread beyond this station. I've had 3 communications this morning from other human administrators dealing with suddenly respectful alien colleagues. One of them told me a hegemony trade negotiator actually said, please, for the first time in recorded history. Sarah blinked in surprise. I didn't think it would have that kind of impact. That's because you're thinking like an individual instead of like a species representative, Santos explained, returning to her desk. Like it or not, every human in this sector is now associated with your actions yesterday. The aliens don't see Sarah Chen knocked out a Krillian. They see a human defeated a superior warrior species in single combat. The implications were staggering. Sarah had thought she was simply defending herself against a workplace bully, but apparently she'd inadvertently struck a blow for all of humanity's reputation in the galactic community. What does that mean for me specifically? Sarah asked. Well, the good news is that you're probably the safest human on this station right now. Nobody wants to be the next alien to underestimate human capabilities. The bad news is that you've painted a target on your back for anyone looking to prove that yesterday was a fluke. Santos activated a holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional map of the station. Red dots appeared at various locations, indicating potential trouble spots. Intelligence suggests that some of the more militant Krillian factions are viewing this as a challenge to their species' reputation. They can't let a weak human's victory stand unchallenged without losing face among the warrior castes back on their homeworld. Sarah studied the map, noting that several red dots were clustered around areas where she normally worked. So they're planning some kind of retaliation. More than that, Santos replied grimly. Our sources indicate they're planning to make an example of you. Something public and humiliating that will restore their species' reputation while putting humans back in what they consider our proper place. The captain touched another control, and the display shifted to show communication intercepts from the Krillian sector of the station. The text was translated from their clicking language, but the meaning was clear enough. They're calling it a correction of natural order, Santos read. Apparently your victory has disrupted their understanding of the galactic hierarchy, and they intend to fix that. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with yesterday's coolant bath. What kind of correction are they planning? That's still unclear, but intelligence suggests they're waiting for reinforcements. 3 more Krillian cargo haulers are due to arrive within the next 48 hours, and all of them are carrying what our sensors indicate are security personnel. Santos shut off the display and leaned back in her chair. The thing is, Chen, we can't just hide you away until this blows over. That would send exactly the wrong message to every species on this station. If we back down now, we'll be right back where we started, with humans being treated as second-class citizens. That's given us an opportunity to reset the relationship between our species, but only if we handle it correctly. A soft chime indicated that someone was requesting entry to the office. Santos checked her screen and smiled. Ah, perfect timing. Come in, Sergeant. The door slid open to admit a stocky man in his 40s wearing the grey jumpsuit of a civilian engineer. But his bearing and the way his eyes immediately scanned the room for threats marked him as military as clearly as if he'd been wearing full-dress uniform. Captain, he said with a slight nod. Heard you might need some assistance with a little cultural exchange program. Chen, meet Sergeant First Class James Morrison, formerly of the Terran Marine Corps, Xeno Contact Division. Morrison, this is the young lady who started our current diplomatic situation. Morrison looked Sarah up and down with professional assessment. You're the one who decked the bug boy. Nice work. Clean technique, good target selection. Where'd you learn to fight? Street fighting, mostly, Sarah replied. Mixed martial arts from the arcologies. Shows. Military training focuses more on equipment and tactics, but there's something to be said for pure aggression and surprise. Morrison turned back to Santos. What's the situation, Captain? Santos quickly briefed Morrison on the intelligence reports and the expected Krillian response. The former Marine listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as various pieces fell into place. So they're bringing in professional muscle to restore their reputation, he summarized when Santos finished. Classic warrior culture response, They can't let the defeat stand without addressing it, or they lose credibility with their own people.
Exactly. The question is, how do we handle their response in a way that establishes clear boundaries without starting an actual war? Morrison was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through various scenarios. We need to demonstrate that yesterday wasn't a fluke, but we also need to make sure they understand that escalation isn't in their best interests.
What we need is a controlled demonstration of human combat capabilities. What did you have in mind? Well, if they want a public confrontation, we give them one, but we do it on our terms, with our rules, and with an audience that includes representatives from every major species on this station. Santos raised an eyebrow. You're talking about a formal challenge?
Exactly.
Most warrior cultures have protocols for resolving disputes through single combat or team competitions. If we can get them to agree to a formal contest, we can control the parameters and make sure it's conducted safely. Sarah found herself speaking up. What makes you think they'll agree to formal rules instead of just jumping me in a corridor somewhere? Morrison smiled grimly. Because if they do this informally, it looks like thuggery.
If they do it formally, it looks like honorable combat. Given their cultural values, they'll have to choose the formal route or lose face among the other warrior species on the station.
Santos was already reaching for her comm unit. I'll contact the Krillian trade representative and propose a formal resolution to the dispute. Morrison, I want you to start organizing our people and putting together a training regimen for Chen.
Wait,
Sarah interrupted. Training regimen? Are you expecting me to fight again? Chen, Santos said seriously, like it or not, you've become the symbol of human resistance to alien bullying. If we're going to make this work, you need to be prepared to follow through on what you started. Morrison nodded agreement. The good news is that you've already proven you have the skills and the mindset. What you need now is some tactical training and backup planning. No offense, but street fighting techniques only go so far against professional warriors. Over the next hour, Santos and Morrison outlined their plan. Sarah would undergo intensive training with the station's human ex-military personnel, learning not just combat techniques but also psychological warfare and tactical thinking. Meanwhile, Santos would negotiate with the Krillian leadership to establish formal protocols for resolving the dispute. The goal was to create a situation where human capabilities could be demonstrated clearly and decisively, establishing a new baseline for interspecies relations without triggering a larger conflict. It was ambitious, risky, and completely dependent on Sarah's ability to perform under pressure. I have one condition, Sarah said when they finished explaining the plan. Name it, Santos replied. If we're going to do this, we do it right. No half measures, no backing down, and no treating me like a fragile flower who needs protection. If I'm representing humanity in this, then I want to represent us at our best. Morrison grinned and extended his hand.
Welcome to the war, Chen.
Let's go show these aliens what humans are really made of. As they shook hands, Sarah felt the weight of representing her entire species settling on her shoulders. Yesterday, she'd been a maintenance worker defending herself against a bully. Today, she was apparently becoming the face of human resistance to alien oppression. The Krylians wanted a demonstration of their superiority? They were about to get a lesson in why humans had fought their way to the stars despite being smaller and weaker than most galactic species. Sometimes the best defense was a good offense, and Sarah was ready to take the fight to them. But first, she had some serious training to do. The warrior culture of Krillia Prime was about to meet the survival instincts of Earth's urban combat zones, and Sarah was determined to make sure they remembered the encounter for a very long time. The next 48 hours were going to determine whether humans took their place as equals in the galactic community, or whether they remained second-class citizens subject to the whims of stronger species. Sarah Chen, maintenance worker turned unlikely champion, was about to find out just how far her species had come since leaving their homeworld behind. The gymnasium in Section 9 had been converted into something resembling a military training facility overnight. Equipment that Sarah hadn't seen since her archaeology days appeared as if by magic. Heavy bags, speed bags, training mats, and various pieces of exercise equipment that looked like they belonged in a Marine Corps boot camp rather than a civilian space station. Sergeant Morrison stood in the center of the organized chaos, directing the dozen human volunteers who'd answered Captain Santos's call. Sarah recognized some of them from around the station. Rodriguez from Environmental Systems, who'd apparently served in the Titan conflict. Kim from Communications, whose slight frame concealed years of special operations training. And Patterson from the docking bays, whose scarred knuckles suggested extensive experience in close-quarters combat. All right, people. Morrison called out as Sarah entered the gymnasium. Our girl Chen here has already proven she can handle herself against one oversized bug.
Now we need to make sure she can deal with whatever else they throw at her. The assembled humans turned to look at Sarah with expressions that mixed respect, curiosity, and professional assessment.
These weren't civilians playing at being soldiers. They were experienced fighters who understood exactly what was at stake. Chen, Morrison continued, meet your training team. Rodriguez here will work on your conditioning and strength training. Kim will handle tactics and battlefield psychology. Patterson's going to teach you some of the dirtier tricks that they don't show in martial arts classes. Rodriguez stepped forward first, a compact woman in her 40s whose muscles showed the kind of definition that came from years of military PT. I watched the security footage of your fight yesterday. Good technique, but you were breathing hard after 30 seconds of action. If the Krylians bring multiple opponents, you'll need better endurance. Sarah nodded, accepting the criticism. Her street fighting experience had mostly involved brief, violent encounters that were over quickly. A prolonged engagement would require different preparation. Kim was next, her pale features set in serious concentration. Krylian combat doctrine emphasizes overwhelming force and intimidation. They rely on their size and strength to demoralize opponents before the fight even begins. We need to work on mental preparation and tactical thinking. And I'm going to teach you how to hurt things that are bigger, stronger, and better armored than you, Patterson added with a grin that wasn't entirely friendly. Because when you're fighting for survival, fair play is just a way to get dead. Morrison clapped his hands together. We've got 36 hours before the Krylian reinforcements arrive, and 48 hours before Captain Santos expects us to have a response ready for their formal challenge. That's not a lot of time to turn a maintenance worker into a professional warrior, but it's what we've got. The next 6 hours were among the most grueling of Sarah's life. Rodriguez put her through conditioning exercises that left her muscles screaming and her lungs burning. Kim drilled her on combat psychology, teaching her how to read an opponent's body language and exploit their assumptions about human limitations. But it was Patterson's instruction that proved most enlightening. The former Marine had grown up in the conflict zones of Earth's various resource wars, and his approach to combat was refreshingly practical. Forget everything you think you know about fair fighting, he told her as they squared off on the training mats. When you're outweighed by 80 pounds and facing an opponent with natural armor plating, your only advantages are speed, surprise, and willingness to do whatever it takes to win. He demonstrated techniques that would have been considered illegal in any sporting context. Eye strikes, joint manipulation, and attacks on pressure points that could disable much larger opponents. More importantly, he taught her how to think tactically about combat. The mistake most people make is thinking that fighting is about strength. He explained while showing her how to use an opponent's momentum against them. Real fighting is about problem-solving under pressure. Every opponent is a puzzle to be solved, and bigger opponents just mean bigger weak points to exploit. By the end of the first day, Sarah was exhausted but confident. Her body ached in places she hadn't known existed, but she could feel herself adapting to the intensive training. More importantly, she was beginning to think like a tactician rather than just a fighter. Morrison gathered the team together as the station's lights dimmed to simulate evening. Good work today. Chen, you're picking this up faster than I expected. Rodriguez, how's her conditioning? Better than I thought it would be, the former soldier replied. She's got good natural fitness and excellent recovery time. Another day of intensive work and she'll be ready for extended combat. Kim? She's a quick study on tactics and she's got good instincts for reading opponents. More importantly, she doesn't let intimidation affect her judgment. That's going to be crucial against warrior caste Krylians. Patterson? The scarred Marine grinned. She's mean enough. That's half the battle right there. Give me another day and she'll be able to take apart something twice her size. Morrison nodded satisfaction. All right, people, get some rest. Tomorrow we work on team tactics and equipment familiarization. Chen, stick around. There's something else we need to discuss. After the others had filed out, Morrison led Sarah to a small office adjacent to the gymnasium. Inside, Captain Santos was waiting with another man Sarah didn't recognize. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered features that suggested extensive off-world experience. Chen, meet Commander Jackson, formerly of Naval Intelligence, Santos said by way of introduction. He's been gathering information on our Krylian friends. Jackson activated a holographic display that showed detailed anatomical diagrams of Krylian physiology. I've been studying their species for the better part of 10 years, and there are some things you need to know before tomorrow's training session.
The diagrams rotated slowly, highlighting various systems and structures.
Krillians evolved on a high-gravity world with extremely dangerous predators.
Their chitinous exoskeleton is designed to deflect slashing attacks and absorb impact, but it has weaknesses. He pointed to specific areas on the display. Joint articulation points here, here, and here. Sensory organs that are more vulnerable than they appear. And most importantly, psychological pressure points that can be exploited if you know what to look for. Sarah studied the information carefully. What kind of psychological pressure points? Krillian warrior culture is built around the concept of individual supremacy, Jackson explained. They believe that superior warriors deserve to dominate inferior ones, and they have very specific ideas about what constitutes superiority. Defeat by a smaller, supposedly weaker opponent challenges their entire worldview. Santos leaned forward in her chair. What Jackson is telling you is that your victory yesterday was more traumatic for Vorthak than just getting knocked unconscious. You've essentially proven that his fundamental beliefs about the universe are wrong. That's why they're bringing in reinforcements, Jackson continued. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about restoring their faith in the natural order of things. They need to prove that yesterday was a fluke, or their entire self-image as a warrior race begins to crumble. The implications were staggering. Sarah had thought she was just defending herself against a bully, but apparently she'd struck a blow against an entire species' sense of identity. So what does that mean for the formal challenge, she asked. Morrison answered from where he'd been studying the anatomical displays. It means they're going to send their best warrior, not just some dock worker looking for trouble. We're talking about professional soldiers trained from childhood in combat techniques. But it also means they're under tremendous psychological pressure, Jackson added. If their champion loses to you again, it validates your first victory and suggests that Krillian superiority isn't as absolute as they believe. Santos stood up and moved to the viewport, looking out at the docking bays where the first of the Krillian reinforcement ships was just becoming visible in the distance. The formal challenge has been accepted. Tomorrow at 1400 hours, in the main plaza, with representatives from every species on the station as witnesses. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What are the terms? Single combat, no weapons, standard station gravity and atmosphere. Winner takes all, losers species acknowledges the victory and adjusts their behavior accordingly. And if I lose? Santos turned back from the viewport, her expression serious. If you lose, humanity goes back to being treated as second-class citizens throughout this sector. Every human on this station and probably every human in the outer colonies becomes fair game for any alien that wants to push us around.
Morrison placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder.
No pressure or anything. Despite the gravity of the situation, Sarah found herself smiling. Actually, that makes it easier. When the stakes are that high, you don't have the luxury of worrying about failure. Jackson shut off the holographic display. There's one more thing you should know. Intelligence suggests that the Krillian champion they're sending isn't just any warrior. It's Korvakteth, their species' most decorated fighter. He's never been defeated in single combat, and he specifically requested this assignment. Why would their best warrior request to fight me? Because defeating the human who humiliated Vorthak will restore his own honor and prove that Krillian supremacy is still intact, Santos explained. For him, this is as much about personal glory as it is about species reputation. Sarah absorbed this information silently. Tomorrow she would be facing not just a large, strong opponent, but a trained professional who had built his entire career on being unbeatable. The pressure should have been overwhelming, but instead she felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. Good, she said finally. If we're going to do this, we might as well do it against the best they've got. Beating their champion will make a much stronger statement than defeating another dock worker. Morrison grinned. I like the way you think, Chen. Get some rest. Tomorrow we finish your training, and then you get to show the galaxy what humans are really made of. As Sarah made her way back to her quarters, she was surprised to find the corridors lined with humans from throughout the station. Word of the formal challenge had spread, and her fellow crew members had come out to show their support. Some nodded respectfully as she passed. Others called out words of encouragement, and a few simply stood in silent solidarity. Near her quarters, she encountered Dr. Cohen. Elizabeth Harper, the station's chief medical officer, and one of the most respected humans in the outer colonies. The older woman had been watching the proceedings with keen interest. Chen, Dr. Harper said, falling into step beside her. I wanted you to know that what you're doing is important, not just for the people on this station, but for every human trying to make a life among the stars. Sarah looked at the doctor with surprise. I'm just defending myself against a bully.
No, Harper replied seriously.
You're defending all of us. Every time a human gets pushed around and doesn't fight back, it reinforces the aliens' belief that we're weak and helpless.
Every time one of us stands up and fights, it forces them to reconsider their assumptions. They stopped outside Sarah's quarters, and Harper placed a hand on her arm.
My daughter is serving on a deep space exploration vessel, where she's the only human in a crew of 20. Yesterday, for the first time in her career, her alien crewmates asked for her opinion instead of just issuing orders. That's because of what you did. As Sarah settled into bed that night, she thought about Dr. Follick, Harper's words, and the faces of all the humans who'd come out to support her. Tomorrow wasn't just about her anymore. It was about proving that humans belonged among the stars as equals, not as junior partners to be tolerated by stronger species. The Krillians wanted to restore their sense of superiority. They were about to discover that humans had spent millennia fighting opponents larger and stronger than themselves, and they'd developed some very effective techniques for evening the odds. Korvatdeath might be the most decorated warrior of his species, but he was about to face something his training had never prepared him for: human ingenuity, determination, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. Sarah Chen, maintenance worker turned symbol of human resistance, was ready to show the galaxy exactly why her species had earned their place among the stars. 6 months after the fight that changed everything, Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the newly commissioned UES Determination, watching as Kepler Station grew smaller in the viewport. She wore the dark blue uniform of a Terran Diplomatic Corps security specialist, her lieutenant's bars gleaming against the crisp fabric. The promotion had come with a new assignment: traveling throughout the outer colonies to help establish security protocols for human settlements. Captain Santos approached from behind, her own uniform now bearing the insignia of a full colonel in the expanding Terran Defense Authority.
Nervous about leaving?
Sarah turned from the viewport with a slight smile. A little. Kepler's been home for 3 years. It's strange to think I won't be crawling through maintenance shafts anymore. I don't think maintenance work is in your future, Chen. The intelligence reports from across the sector show that your fight with Korvathas has had exactly the impact we hoped for. Human settlements that have been dealing with harassment for years are suddenly finding their alien neighbors much more respectful. Santos handed Sarah a datapad containing status reports from human colonies throughout the region. The pattern was consistent: decreased incidents of harassment, increased participation in trade negotiations, and generally improved relations with alien species across the board. New Tokyo reports that the Hegemony Trade Consortium actually apologized for previous misunderstandings and offered improved contract terms, Santos continued. The mining colony on Vega 7 says the Ursinian security forces have started asking for human input on patrol strategies instead of just issuing orders. Sarah scrolled through the reports with growing amazement. All of this because of one fight? Not just the fight, Santos corrected. Because of what the fight represented. You proved that humans aren't the fragile weaklings that most aliens assumed we were. More importantly, you proved it in a way that warrior cultures throughout the galaxy could understand and respect. Through the ship's communication system, Sarah could hear the bustle of activity as the crew prepared for their first jump to hyperspace. The Determination was one of the new Explorer-class vessels, designed specifically for extended operations in the outer colonies where human presence was still relatively new. Commander Jackson materialized beside them, his intelligence officer insignia, now accompanied by the silver leaves of a lieutenant colonel. Chen, there's something you should see before we make our first jump. He activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of the local galactic sector. Human settlements were marked in blue, and each one was accompanied by status indicators showing the current state of interspecies relations. This is the sector map from 6 months ago, Jackson explained. The display showed mostly red and yellow indicators representing tense or hostile relations between human settlements and their alien neighbors. And this is today. The display updated, and Sarah watched in amazement as most of the indicators shifted to green or blue, representing neutral to friendly relations. The psychological impact has been extraordinary, Jackson continued. Intelligence reports indicate that most alien species have fundamentally revised their assessment of human capabilities. We're no longer seen as a client species that needs protection or management. Sarah studied the map, trying to process the magnitude of what she was seeing. How much of this is directly attributable to what happened on Kepler? According to our analysis, about 70% of the improvement can be traced back to reports of your victory spreading through alien communication networks, Jackson replied. The remaining 30% is from follow-up incidents where other humans have successfully defended themselves using similar tactics. Santos nodded toward the display. We've had 17 documented cases in the past 6 months where humans have used your fight as a psychological weapon.
Simply mentioning that they're the same species that produced the Krillian killer has been enough to deter aggressive behavior. Sarah winced at the nickname.
I really wish people would stop calling me that. Why? It's become a badge of honor throughout the human colonies, Jackson said with amusement. There are recruiting posters using your image to encourage young people to join the diplomatic corps or defense forces. The ship's captain, a veteran named Thomas Mitchell, approached the group as the final preparations for hyperspace were completed. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be jumping in 5 minutes. Our first destination is the Proxima system, where the colonial administrator has requested assistance with some cultural sensitivity issues involving the local Krillian trade delegation. Sarah raised an eyebrow. More Krylians? Word of your victory has spread throughout their culture, Mitchell explained. Most Krylian warriors now consider fighting a human to be a mark of honor, assuming they survive the encounter. The colonists on Proxima 3 are being challenged to formal duels on a daily basis. Santos laughed. It seems your reputation has made humans a valuable commodity in the warrior culture marketplace. Every young Krellian fighter wants to test themselves against the species that defeated their greatest champion. That's actually part of your new job, Jackson added. Teaching human colonists how to handle formal challenges without starting interstellar incidents. We've developed a curriculum based on the training program Morrison put together for you. The ship shuddered slightly as the hyperspace generators spun up to full power. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of reality shifting around them as they prepared to slip between dimensions for the journey to their first assignment. You know, she said thoughtfully, when Vorthak dumped that coolant on me, I never imagined it would lead to all this. That's the thing about moments of historical significance, Santos observed. They usually don't feel significant when they're happening. You were just defending yourself against a workplace bully. The fact that it became a symbol of human resistance to alien oppression was an accident of timing and circumstance. The hyperspace jump engaged with a sensation like falling sideways through space and time. As the ship settled into its faster-than-light trajectory, Sarah found herself thinking about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a maintenance worker trying to do her job without being harassed by alien co-workers. Now she was a decorated officer in the Terran Diplomatic Corps, traveling to human settlements throughout the outer colonies to help establish the new reality of human-alien relations. Morrison appeared in the corridor, now wearing the uniform of a major in the Defense Authority. Chen, we need to go over the training protocols for the Proxima assignment. The colonists there have been requesting formal combat training since the challenges started. How many challenges are we talking about? Sarah asked as they made their way toward the ship's conference room. 17 in the past month, Morrison replied grimly. Fortunately, the colonists have been smart enough to decline most of them and refer the challenges to the colonial administration. But sooner or later, someone's going to accept a challenge without proper training. The conference room was equipped with holographic displays showing the current situation on Proxima 3. The human colony was thriving economically, but the constant stream of young Krillian warriors seeking to prove themselves against the warrior humans was becoming a diplomatic nightmare. The irony is that your reputation has made humans more valuable as trading partners and allies, Jackson explained as the briefing began. Every species that formerly looked down on us now wants to associate with the people who humbled the Krillian warrior caste. But it's also created new problems. The tactical displays showed incident reports from across the sector. Human merchants were being offered preferential trading terms by species that had previously ignored them. Human diplomats were finding alien negotiators suddenly willing to make concessions that would have been unthinkable before. Human security personnel were being recruited by alien organizations at unprecedented rates. We've essentially become the galactic equivalent of a luxury brand, Santos observed wryly. Everyone wants to be associated with the tough, competent humans who can handle themselves in a fight. Patterson joined the briefing via holographic communication from his new assignment on the frontier world of New Brisbane. Chen, I wanted you to know that the training methods we developed for you are being adapted throughout the colonial militia. We've had 3 successful defenses against formal challenges in the past month, all using variations of the tactics you demonstrated. Sarah found herself both proud and slightly overwhelmed by the scope of what had grown from her confrontation with Vorthak. Has there been any backlash from the alien community? Some, Jackson admitted. A few species resent the shift in the power balance, particularly those who benefited from treating humans as second-class citizens. But the warrior cultures have generally accepted the new reality. Strength respects strength, and you've proven that humans are stronger than they assumed. The ship's communication system chimed with an incoming message from the Proxima system. Colonial Administrator Williams appeared on the holographic display, her expression mixing relief with exhaustion. Colonel Santos, Lieutenant Chen, thank God you're coming. We've had 6 more challenges since yesterday,
including one from a hegemony military attaché who wants to test the human reputation for combat excellence. I'm running out of diplomatic excuses for declining.
Santos leaned forward toward the display. What's the local political situation? Complex, Williams replied. The Kralian challenges we can handle through their formal protocols, but now other species are getting involved.
Everyone wants to see if the human reputation is justified, and some of them don't understand the concept of refusing a challenge. Sarah studied the administrator's tired features.
What do you need from us? Training for our security personnel, diplomatic guidance for handling the challenges, and frankly, just having you here might be enough to discourage some of the more casual challenges. Your reputation precedes you, Lieutenant. As the conference ended and the team dispersed to prepare for their arrival at Proxima, Sarah found herself back at the observation deck watching the swirling colors of hyperspace. Captain Mitchell joined her at the viewport. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. "I was just thinking about responsibility," Sarah replied.
6 months ago, the only person I was responsible for was myself. Now it feels like I'm carrying the reputation of the entire human species.
Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "That's the burden of being a symbol, Chen. But remember, you didn't ask for this role. You just stood up to a bully when no one else would. Everything else grew from that simple act of courage. Do you think we're heading for larger conflicts?" Sarah asked. "All this attention on human combat capabilities, the shifting power dynamics, it feels like we're building towards something bigger."
Possibly, Mitchell admitted,
But consider the alternative. Before your fight with Korvact, humans were slowly being marginalized in galactic society. We were becoming a client species, dependent on alien goodwill for our survival. Now we're equals, respected for our capabilities rather than tolerated out of pity. The ship's navigation system announced their approach to the Proxima system, and Sarah could feel the subtle shift as they prepared to drop out of hyperspace.
Soon they would be dealing with the practical challenges of their new reputation, helping human colonists navigate the complex realities of being taken seriously by the galactic community.
You know what I've learned from all this?
Sarah said as they watched the colors of hyperspace begin to fade.
"What's that?" "Sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never intended to fight. Borthak thought he was humiliating a weak human maintenance worker. Instead, he gave me the opportunity to prove that humans deserve respect throughout the galaxy." As the determination dropped out of hyperspace and the Proxima system materialized around them, Sarah Chen prepared to face the next chapter of her unlikely career as humanity's champion. The maintenance worker who'd been dumped with coolant had become the symbol of human strength and determination among the stars. The galaxy had learned not to underestimate humans. Now, it was time to help her own species learn to live up to the reputation she'd accidentally created for them. The real work was just beginning.